Hundreds of people go missing in our national parks and forests every year. Of those, a fairly high number of them disappear under very strange circumstances. A former police detective named David Paulides and his Can-Am Missing project have put in thousands of hours of research into this phenomenon and documented these in a series of books and films called Missing 411. I've left links in the description that will take you to the Can-Am website where you can purchase the books and films. Today we'll be looking at 4 of these strange cases from the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, which spans over 500,000 acres in North Carolina and Tennessee and hosts over 10 million people annually according to the National Park Service. So, if you like this kind of content, hit that like button and make sure you subscribe and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our content uploads. So now, on to the stories. "21-year-old Mark Hansen from Newport, Kentucky, alongside Ben Fish and John Chichester, made the trip to the Great Smoky Mountains to hike along the Appalachian Trail. The 3 men were intelligent individuals and students from Eastern Kentucky State University. They were good friends and wanted to spend some time together over spring break. That year, the plan was to begin their hike on the Appalachian Trail at the Big Creek Ranger Station at the east end of the park. From there, they would hike around 16 miles to the Tri-Corner Shelter. This is a challenging hike, as the route would have taken them through an elevation climb of nearly 5,000 feet over its course. While the group was aware that the weather was going to get bad, they certainly weren't prepared for just how bad it actually got. The 3 men set out on the hike on March 9, 1975, and the weather conditions weren't ideal. The days leading up to the hike had seen heavy rains at the lower elevations and heavy snow at the higher elevations, and that morning, a tornado had touched down inside the park. Despite this, the 3 men continued on with their hike, and they quickly found that the gear that they did have with them was totally wrong. Shortly after the group left the trailhead, the weather took a turn for the worse. The wind picked up and it began to snow heavily. The men were somewhere between Low Gap and the Cosby Knob Trail Shelter. John Chichester realized that he had had enough. He was drenched, cold, and he knew he wouldn't be able to make the hike under these conditions, so he turned around and headed back to the car. Approximately 1 mile from the point where John turned back, Mark and Ben passed the shelter at Cosby Knob. They were still facing an incredibly challenging uphill battle, literally. Daylight was running out quickly, and the wind and snow showed no signs of letting up. At this point, they managed to make it to Camel Gap, but this was only halfway to their intended destination at Tri-Corner. Cosby Knob and its warm shelter was much closer, but the pair didn't want to turn back and give up the ground they had covered, so they continued on. It's important to note that the men were in good physical condition, but at this point they had no energy left and still had several miles of trail going uphill. Mark started showing clear signs of hypothermia, and while Ben was handling the conditions better, Mark told Ben that his backpack was too heavy and that it was slowing him down, so he dropped it on the trail. Ben tried to convince Mark that he needed to carry the pack, but by then Mark was no longer thinking rationally and was dead set on leaving the pack where it lay. They continued on and made it to Mount Guillot at 7 p.m. Ben was still encouraging Mark to keep up, which somehow he was able to do for another 90 minutes. At 8:30 p.m., the men were now in total darkness. The temperature was dropping, and the snow was still coming down. At that point, Mark was shivering and unable to continue, and he fell to the ground. Ben tried his best to get him up, but Mark was now unable to stand. Ben walked ahead another 200 yards hoping to come across some help, but quickly realized that he too was spent, and so he got into his sleeping bag to get some warmth and try to survive. What Ben didn't know was just another 200 yards farther ahead was the shelter at Tri-Corner. Ben, obviously affected by the weather, remembered hearing Mark shout for help during the night, but he wasn't sure if he had been dreaming or if he had actually heard it. Ben got up at 7 a.m. and went to find Mark, but he wasn't where he laid down. No tracks were found, and there were several inches of fresh snow on the ground. Ben then made his way up to Tri-Corner alone for help, and a search was launched. Ben notified the National Park Service, and Mark was officially listed as missing on the 11th. Searchers found Mark's undisturbed backpack in the same place he had put it down the night before. The next day, the 12th, saw a number of volunteers join the search, and the area was gone over along with some nearby caves, but nothing was found. The search continued for another week, eventually being joined by helicopters and dog teams. Mark's body was eventually found on the 17th at 2 p.m., 2 miles down Book Fork Creek from the Appalachian Trail. Searchers found Mark leaning against a tree, his parka wide open, and his gloves and boots lying nearby in the snow. Mark was carried to a clearing where he was airlifted out of the park. David Paulides notes that this is highly unusual since, given Mark's total exhaustion, that he was able to travel 2 miles to the point where he was located. Did Ben really hear Mark scream for help during the night, or was he just dreaming? No sign of a struggle was found anywhere. It's strange that Ben tried to get Mark up to continue on, but he couldn't, and then Mark somehow manages to make it 2 miles in total darkness. Did Mark actually travel those 2 miles? Could something have moved him there? We'll probably never know exactly what happened to Mark Hansen, but it does leave us with some pretty interesting questions. So what do you think happened? Let us know in the comments below. Susan Clements, also known as Mitzi by her friends, was 53 years old at the time of her disappearance. Susan went missing while hiking with her 20-year-old daughter on September 25, 2018. They were hiking near Clements Dome in the Great Smoky Mountains. Susan disappeared at approximately 5 p.m. very close to the parking lot. The women were about a quarter of a mile away from Andrews Bald Mountain on the Forney Ridge Trail when her daughter made the decision to hike ahead a short distance with the intention of turning around and meeting back up in the parking lot. It's unclear exactly how long the pair were separated, but it's thought that it wasn't for a significant amount of time. When her daughter got back to the parking lot, she couldn't find her mother anywhere. Not thinking much of it at first, she waited around for a while and then retraced her steps back onto the trail, but Susan wasn't anywhere. After a couple hours, the daughter began to panic and contacted park authorities. They conducted their own search about the area, but soon brought in outside help. Nearly 200 trained searchers with drones, dog teams, and helicopters from 50 search and rescue organizations helped park staff in the large-scale search, but nothing was found. The search was made very difficult due to developing weather conditions. Heavy fog rolled into the forest with rain, severely limiting visibility, and temperatures dropped into the low 40s. Search coordination was also very difficult given the lack of cellular coverage in the area. In an effort to help the search, Verizon deployed a portable cell tower in the area so team leaders could better coordinate with their search teams. By October 1st, the searchers were baffled that they couldn't find a trace of Susan anywhere, given the significant resources put into the search. The disappearance seems to have happened very quickly, as no evidence was left behind, no sign of a struggle, no ripped clothing, no nothing. The area where she disappeared was close to the parking lot and was well signed, so it's tough to believe that she had gotten lost and left the trail. The search lasted for a week and involved search teams from 5 states, helicopters, drones, and canine units, and ended when Susan's body was found 2 miles west of the Clements Dome parking lot and 3/4 of a mile south of the Appalachian Trail. No foul play was suspected, as according to an autopsy, Susan had succumbed to hypothermia. Susan and her daughter had only planned on a day's hike, so they didn't bring any extra clothing or supplies with them. But why did she leave the well-signed trail and travel 2 miles west when she was quite close to the parking lot? Surely she would have recognized symptoms of hypothermia and made her way to the parking lot if she felt she was in danger. So what do you think happened? Let us know in the comments below. "13-year-old Brad Levese was spending the day with his parents and some of their friends at the Great Smoky Mountains National Park on March 28, 1993. Brad's parents had decided that they wanted to go to Rainbow Falls, located on Mount LeConte Trail. As the name suggests, Rainbow Falls is an absolutely breathtaking waterfall sitting at an elevation of 3,200 feet, or just roughly half of the 6,600-foot Mount LeConte it resides on. The family and friends were having a great day hiking, but things would soon take a turn for the worse at some point during the late afternoon. It's not clear exactly how or where this happened, but at some point during the hike, Brad became separated from the rest of the group, as he was no longer with them along the well-marked and well-defined trail. The group didn't hear anything related to a fall, no screams, no calls for help, nothing. Brad's parents began to panic, and the group searched the immediate area, retracing their steps. When Brad was nowhere to be found, they abandoned their search and went back down the mountain to notify authorities. The resulting search for Brad was massive, and volunteers poured into the area to help out. Soldiers from Fort Campbell, Kentucky arrived with 5 helicopters, each fitted with infrared tracking sensors. The primary search area was listed as being half a mile wide and 2.5 miles long. The National Park Service, along with other experts, thought that Brad must have been in that search grid, as he couldn't have traveled far given the terrain. The elevation where Brad disappeared was thought to be around 3,000 feet, and the group's planned destination at Rainbow Falls was at roughly 3,300 feet. On April 4th, a National Park Service official said that Brad's body was found by a park volunteer on day 6 of the search, in a steep, rugged area about a half mile off of the Rainbow Falls Trail at the base of an unnamed waterfall. Searchers said they were surprised at how far and how high the boy had traveled, as he was found at roughly the upper limits of the search area, at about 4,800 feet, meaning that Brad would have had to have ascended 1,600 feet after becoming lost. The searchers said that the area is so steep and so thick that it's shocking that anyone would even try to go in there. So question number 1 is, how did Brad even get to that location? People generally travel downhill, not uphill, when they're lost, as it is much easier to do so. Park officials launched an investigation, and Brad's body was left at the scene for quite a while before being moved. National Park Service officials announced Brad's cause of death as being the result of head trauma, which was later confirmed by the University of Tennessee Medical Center. This determination was reached by a visual inspection of the body. No autopsy was deemed necessary. This is odd, because generally, with a disappearance and death under unknown circumstances, autopsies are routinely done to eliminate the possibility of foul play. So what happened to Brad Lavies along the clearly marked Rainbow Falls Trail? One second he was there, the next he was gone. No cry for help, no nothing. Why did he move nearly 2,000 feet uphill after becoming separated from the group? And most importantly, how did he sustain the head trauma that officials say took his life? Perhaps we'll never know. So what do you think happened? Let us know in the comments below. Thelma Melton, known as Polly to her friends, was 58 years old at the time of her disappearance. She went on a hiking trip with her husband Bob and 2 close friends in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. On September 25, 1981, they were on the Deep Creek Trail near a campground. Thelma had been hiking this trail for several years and had become very familiar with it. Her husband Bob, who was nearly 20 years older than Thelma, sat the hike out as he was tired and his health generally wasn't the best. So Bob stayed in the camper while Thelma and 2 friends went out on a simple hike along the familiar trail. The ladies were having a good time, and Thelma, who wanted to quicken the pace a bit, decided to walk just ahead of her two friends. She walked over a small hill and briefly out of sight of the other two. When her two friends got over the hill, Thelma was nowhere to be found. The two friends thought it was odd, but assumed that Thelma must have kicked up the pace another gear and that they would find her at the end of the hike. The two friends made it back to the trailer at around 4:30 p.m., but Thelma wasn't there. Bob said he hadn't seen Thelma since they all left together hours earlier. The friends hadn't heard anything out of sorts that would have indicated anything was wrong. Thelma's friends went back to the area where they got separated and began to look for her. Nothing was found, and at 6 p.m., she was officially reported missing. A much larger search was soon underway, and over the course of a week, nearly 200 people participated along with 9 search dogs. At one point, a dog alerted on a downed tree, and the handler believed that Thelma may have stopped to rest there for a minute. This was the last clue in the disappearance of Thelma Melton. No additional scent, no clothing, no nothing has ever been found. Investigators looked at the possibility of Thelma intentionally disappearing, but no evidence pointing to that has ever come to light. Animal predation seems unlikely, as there would have been an obvious sign of a struggle. Whatever happened to Thelma had to have happened in that extremely short time that she and her friends were on opposite sides of that hill. So what do you think happened? Let us know in the comments below. So, that's going to do it for this episode of the Sheldrake Files. As always, if you like this kind of content, hit that like button, and make sure you subscribe and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our content uploads. So, from all of us here at the Sheldrake Files, thank you for watching, and we'll catch you next time.